Good afternoon, everyone. This is David Mandel at OL Children's Home and Family Services. Thank everyone for joining us for this difficult yet very important conversation, Israel at War, Support for Individuals and Families. Certainly everyone around the world who is aware of the conflict that began Saturday morning at 6:30 a.m. This is the fourth day of the conflict in Israel, third day, people from different parts of the world. This conversation is dealing with trauma, anxiety on a very real level for individuals who may have families throughout Israel, in the south, in the north, anywhere. Nowhere in Israel is anyone immune to the circumstances that are going on today. This may be for individuals that have family members who were there, young couples who recently got married, moved there. They may have children there in seminary, in school, university, yeshiva. We're joined by two very distinguished panelists, Dr. Naomi Baum, a specialist in trauma and resilience. Dr. Baum lives in Israel. She not only specializes in trauma in Israel right now, she has published many books and articles. She created the Building Resilience Intervention, an evidence-based resilience model that has been applied in Israel and abroad. And certainly our experience right now is most critical. Her most recent book is called Is Resilience? What Israelis Can Teach the World on Trauma and Resilience. We're very proud also that Dr. Baum collaborates with OHEL's Civi Writer in several works on resilience in children. Dr. Baum will be speaking on dealing with trauma with adults, and I will introduce Dr. Norman Blumenthal subsequently to speak about trauma with children, speaking about trauma with children at different age levels. We invite everyone to use your chat function to ask any questions on the chat. You can either ask it that everyone on the chat will see it, several hundred people, or you can ask it privately. Let's go immediately to Dr. Baum, who is currently speaking to us from Israel. And as you know, it is now after 11 p.m. in Israel. Dr. Baum has several family members, a son, a son-in-law, a grandson, other family members currently serving in the conflict, in the theater. Dr. Baum, thank you so much for taking time to speak with us, sharing your thoughts on trauma, how you're dealing with trauma on a personal level, how you are helping others while you are also dealing with it with your family, community, and sharing with us from people listening to around the world. Dr. Baum. Dr. Baum, you're on mute.
You missed my thank you. I said thank you very much, and thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts with you. The fact that I was on mute is just a sign that it's 11:09 in the evening or the nighttime, and I must say that it has been a very long day. The airplanes overhead woke me up very, very early this morning. They've been going all day long to remind us that things are not normal. And that we are in a stage of war. And I've also been working quite vigorously with lots of different communities and staffs from all over Israel, from the south to the north, as everybody is really on edge and getting prepared and reminding themselves really of all the things that they know about how to deal with stress and trauma. And I think that I prefer actually to use the term long-term stress or ongoing stress or extreme stress rather than trauma. Sometimes the word trauma actually sets us off and sets us in a direction that we may less want to go in. So I actually want to begin with something that my daughter said to me tonight. I have to be honest where these things come from. So it came from my daughter, and she said, Ima, this is my daughter whose husband is I don't even know what it's called. He's a very high commander, and he's in charge of about 1,000 men, and they're right on the northern border. And she came to take a little bit of a break. She's got 5 kids, and we ordered Burgers Bar, and we're sitting there, and she said, Ima, what are you going to say? So I said, well, I don't really know. So she said, well, let's think about what you want to say. Maybe you should start with the Dvar Torah. So I said, okay, what do you think? So she said, I have the perfect thing for you. And this is hers. This is Shoshi Baum Troper. This is my daughter. She said, this is how you start. Shir LaMa'alot. This is Tehillim Kuf Chaf Aleph. Tehillim, the book of Psalms, chapter 121. Esa einai el harim shir lama'alot. Esa einai el harim me'ayin yavo ezri. I lift my eyes up onto the hills, from whence cometh my help. That's a free translation, not any registered translation. And she said, the important thing here that she thought that I should bring, and it really hits the nail right on the head. There's a medrash in Breshit Rabbah. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman Patach. Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Nachman, said, and he repeats the words exactly, Shir LaMa'alot esa einai el hehorim. I lift my eyes up, and he changes the word harim, mountains, to horim, parents. I lift up my eyes to my parents who raised me, my parents who taught me. And actually, as I turn to you as adults and parents of children, I think it's important to remember that our kids look up to us. They expect us to set the tone, and how we react in a traumatic or a long-term stress situation is very often how they will react. This really speaks to this medrash from thousands of years ago, speaks to modern psychology almost to a T. The most current psychological research underscores the importance of parents in their children's abilities to cope under stress. We know that parents who are well-regulated, parents who control their stress, parents who are able to deal with the stress, send that message very clearly onto their kids. And that's probably the best thing you can do. And while my dear friend and colleague Norman is going to be talking about children and how to talk to children and how children deal with stress and trauma, I think that he would definitely agree with me that probably the single most important thing is how the adults in the environment of the child, the parents, the caretakers, the teachers, how they deal with stress and trauma and what they model. So it is incredibly important for us to know what to do and how to do it. And that's what I really want to address today. The more regulated you are, the more regulated your child is. Now, what do we mean by regulation, and how do we get there? We all react to stress and trauma. You can enter the internet and find out about all the possible reactions there are, and probably you don't even have to go into the internet to do that. You probably know yourselves. difficulty sleeping, perhaps digestion, upset, sweaty, difficulty concentrating, all those things that you may have been experiencing over the last couple of days. I know that I have been, and the people around me are, and this is all normal, a normal stress reaction. Now, when does it become abnormal, or when does it become something to be really concerned about? When we really shut down functioning, and we may shut down by becoming hypo-aroused, numb, frozen, or we may do the opposite. We may be so aroused that we cannot function. We cannot control our thoughts. We cannot do the work we need to do. We cannot concentrate, and we're all over the place. So those are the two different ends. And what we want to do is get back into that window, that place where we're feeling relatively okay. We're still going to be nervous. We're still going to be upset. We're going to notice this variation. I read, we're being I know I hesitate to use the word bombarded, but we are being bombarded by all sorts of information, aside from rockets. And sometimes the information sets us off. So there was some message tonight from the Home Front Command about how you needed to store, I don't know, water for 3 days and food for 3 days. And all of a sudden my stomach took a lurch when I read that. And then it turned out 5 minutes later that this was like an old notice. This is the notice that they put out always. This is not new. It's not like, okay, now the big one is coming. But, there's a certain amount of arousal that is very normal in this situation. And we have to be kind to ourselves and accepting of ourselves in this situation. And I'm sure in Israel, we may feel it more, but I know that so many of you have relatives in Israel, and many of you have children in Israel, and you're right there with us. You're right there with us. So let's think about what can help us, maybe what has helped us in the past, dealing with very high levels of stress. And again, I prefer to use the word high levels of stress. I think people who were in the South, or who live in the South, who are there now, they certainly experienced trauma. The rest of us are horrified, and maybe as a nation we've experienced trauma, but I think we can categorize it more as severe or high stress. And so what has helped us in the past? What can we do now? And what can you do to help yourselves during this period of time where you're so strongly identified with Israel? So the first thing I think is support, not to be alone. And I think coming into a webinar like this is exactly the right thing to do. You see, there are 497 people participating right now. And that means you are not alone. You are not the only one feeling this way. You are not the only one seeking community, seeking understanding, seeking to be with other people. And I think that is so important to think about where you get that support from and where can you give this support. And it may be in your synagogues, and it may be in your schools, and it may be in your neighborhoods, and it may be with your friends, and maybe with your sisters, your brothers, your parents, your kids. Wherever it is, it's really important not to be alone, to find a place where you can actively get support, you can give support, and seek support. The second piece of, and this is a list I'm giving you, so feel free to write it down and keep it close to you. And you can check to see, okay, how am I doing with this? The second thing is remembering that stress affects us in our bodies. And trauma is actually stored in the body. So we need to pay attention to our bodies. Physical activity is a wonderful way to deal with stress, whether it be taking a walk or taking a bike ride or going for a swim, or just simple stretching. I myself do Qigong, which is a form of Chinese meditative movement. And for me, that works great. And I do that all the time. And that's what I do. Each person has to find what they do, what they know how to do, not necessarily to start something new, but do what you're always doing. And don't forget to do it. Don't give up on it now, because because this is crisis. Dafka, especially during crisis time, you need to take care of yourselves. And that brings me to routine. And part of routine is taking care of how we eat, when we eat, drinking enough, sleeping enough, taking care of doing the things that we always do. We may feel like our routine has kind of, and certainly in Israel, to a large degree, it's kind of gotten all off kilter. But we need to remember that what holds us together are the things that we do every day, whether it's getting up and going to shul in the morning, or going for your morning walk, or having your morning coffee, doing the things that you do every day. So that physical activity, routine, are all very important. The final thing that I want to mention that I think is hugely helpful in dealing with stress is finding meaningful activity. Staying busy is really important. Meaningful activity. Volunteering is about the best thing that you can do. It keeps you busy. It keeps you occupied. You're doing something helpful and useful. You cannot imagine the amount of volunteering that is going on in Israel right now as we speak, whether it be housing people from the South, or preparing meals for soldiers, or gathering money to buy sweatshirts for soldiers who are cold at night, or yeah, you just, the lists are going, and people are busy, and busy doing good things, whether the soldiers need it or not. I don't know, but I know that it makes the citizens feel like they're doing something, and they're doing something good, and I'm sure that they are. Okay, what doesn't help? And with this, I'm actually going to conclude my remarks. We have to think about the things that may be not helpful to us. So I can say with great clarity and without blinking an eye, what doesn't help is media and screens. We really need to be careful about how much we are watching, how much television, how much news, how much internet, and the less the better. Yes, we want to know what's going on. Check in 2, 3, 4 times a day, but don't stay glued to that screen. It will make you crazy. There are definite, clear studies that show that people can be traumatized just from reading the news. You do not have to see every single movie of every single terrible thing that has happened over the last 4 days. Protect yourselves. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person if you don't want to watch somebody being murdered or dragged through the streets or raped. You don't have to watch it. You can turn it off, and you can still be a very good person and a very concerned citizen. You have to take care of yourself. You need to get enough sleep. You must take care of your physical needs. So when you don't get enough sleep and you don't take care of your physical needs, and you withdraw from people, these are all things that won't help you. And while Norman is going to specifically talk to you about children, I want to just make a special note of the parents who have children here in Israel, parents in the US, that would be you, who have children here in Israel. And I have to say that I'm blown away really by your abilities to send your kids. You must be wonderful people. You must be wonderful parents who have sent your children, your boys and your girls, to serve in the IDF, many of whom at this very moment are on the front lines with my children, with my son, with my 2 sons-in-law, with my grandson. I would say that the only difference between you and me is that here in Israel, I feel like I am just like everybody else. Everybody I know has all their kids, all their boys in. My sister, all of her boys are in. All of my nephews on both sides are called up. Everybody has all their kids in. So we kind of feel like we're all in this together, and you may feel very alone, and that speaks to the first thing I talked about, is to seek out support. And I think a wonderful way to seek out support is to find people who are in similar situation to you. People who have children in Israel, people who have children serving in the IDF. And this makes you feel less alone and less crazy, because other people are going to say, how could you keep doing that? How could you let your son go? And that's not going to be helpful at all. I think that you should be extremely proud of your children, extremely proud of your sons and your daughters who are serving, extremely proud of your children who have decided to make their lives in Israel. And the important thing to do, what you can do for them now, is to support them. Now, before we get to you supporting them, I want to tell you what I think you can do to help yourselves, because I know how difficult this is. I really do know how hard it is not to go to those dark places that you and I do not want to go to. And what you can do, and what I do, is to distract yourself. I took some notes for myself, and what I wrote is distraction, distraction, distraction. Anything that makes you feel good, that's what you should do, whether it's reading a book or watching a movie or going out with a friend or taking I keep going back to bike rides because I like bike rides, taking a bike ride, whatever it is that makes you feel good, do it, and do it with other people. This distraction works. And the last thing and this is truly the last thing I want to say, is that before you talk with your child, whether your child be a soldier or just a student in a yeshiva or in a seminary, before you talk to them, before you send them a WhatsApp, just check in with yourself and see how you are doing. See how regulated you are. Are you collected enough? Because when you speak to them and when you talk to them, you really want to send a clear message. You don't want to break down and cry and tell them how worried you are and how concerned you are, and maybe they should come back. Obviously, the soldiers are not coming back. They're not leaving their buddies or the front lines. The yeshiva kids, whether they do or not, that's a choice that you or they may want to make. But you really want to be supportive. You want to say, I'm here for you. I'm proud of you. I love you. Those are the messages that our kids who are here need to hear. That is what our soldiers need to hear. They need to hear how much you love them, how proud you are of them. And I get tears in my eyes when I say that, because that's really the truth. We really are. We're scared out of our boxes. We are. But we go on living, and we go on living because of them. So when you think about your family, before you call them, calm yourself down, collect yourself, think about what you want to say. Tell them that you're concerned. You can share that you're worried, but you really want to tell them how much you love them and how proud you are of them, because that will give them the support they need to keep going. And I think that's about what I wanted to say. So if there's a question.
Naomi, Dr. Baum, that was every single word was very important. I would just like to highlight one or two points that you made. All of the points that you made were so important, and ask you one or two questions. I know that it's after 11:30 p.m. your time in Israel. You spoke about that parents who manage their own stress level are in a better position to help their children. So they have to be in a good place, and you opened it with it, and you also closed with it by saying, before you call your child in Israel, who's living there, who's in university, who's in seminary, yeshiva, be in a good place. You can't call them and say, I'm so afraid for you, I'm so nervous for you. You're not helping the circumstance. I love you, I support you. What can I do right now to help you?
Yes.
And you build that in verse 121 in Tehillim, King David HaMelech's Tehillim, with changing one word, Shir Amalos Esa'enai Elahorim, God, I turn my eyes to you, Elahorim, by changing a letter to Ahorim, parents. I turned to my parents for support. And you spoke about how parents can support their children because children look to their parents. You spoke about how a certain stress level is normal, and you differentiated between trauma and stress. And you spoke about that people who are in the theater of war, living in Gaza, experiencing what's going on, that is trauma. Other individuals, especially those of us overseas, we think about it as trauma, but you described it as stress, even extreme stress.
Yeah.
You even said that sometimes for people, the word trauma may be its own trigger. That's a whole another conversation. I want to ask you about the media, social media, one question.
Sure.
You spoke about that people should avoid a certain amount of the media. They don't have to read every single article. They don't have to watch every single post.
Right.
I'd like to posit with you what we know from 9/11, the repetition of watching the Twin Towers fall, from Hurricane Sandy, homes being washed away.
Yeah.
I'd like to posit with you that not only should people avoid it, people shouldn't watch it because it can become embedded in their memory.
That's
The
right.
pictures from ISIS from a few years ago, the pictures that Hamas was showing of burning people, of ripping people away from their children, away from their parents, taking children as hostages, that if you watch it, it'll be embedded in your memory. You won't be able to take it out of your memory. That will create trauma. I'd like to suggest that we advise people don't watch those media as inviting as it may be to you.
Yeah. Yeah. As tempting as it might be. Right. And it is tempting because somehow we think if we see everything, we will understand it. If we understand it, we'll have control over it. We have to face up to the fact that we really are in a situation that we're not in control of, and it's very uncertain. And watching it, I couldn't agree with you more. It's really harmful. I think it's harmful for our souls. I think it's harmful for our minds. It's harmful for our brains. And we do know that watching footage like that can be very traumatizing. And here I will use the word traumatizing. I use the word traumatizing carefully, but here I will use the word traumatizing. And I think it can create a real wound. That's what the word trauma means. It means a wound. And I think it does wound people. So we have to understand that these little machines that we have, these phones and the computers and and I know Norman's going to talk about it when he talks about children. They affect us too, and we have to be careful about how we consume the information, where we consume it from, how we consume it, and really moderate that. Very, very important and very challenging.
Last question, Dr. Baum, and I'll ask Dr. Blumenthal to comment on it also when he speaks. Comment for a moment to parents in wherever they may be around the world outside of Israel, the US, England, France, who have their adult children right now in Israel, in university, in seminary, in yeshiva. Could you comment about the notion that they are calling their children who may be 18, 20, 25 years old and telling them that they want them to come home versus asking them, what would you like to do? What do you feel safe right now doing?
Yes, I think so. I think obviously, you're kind of pointing me in the direction of what's the correct answer, and there is a correct answer here. I think adult children, we have to consult with them. We have to talk with them. We can share our feelings. We can say, I'm very concerned and I would like to see you home, but it's really important for me to know what you want. And also, when we're talking about the 18-year-olds, the 17, 18-year-olds, that's really tricky. These kids have just left home. They're really first time on their own. I think that it would be very important to speak to the staff of the school, to hear what the school is thinking, to hear how their child is doing, because their child may tell them one thing and the reality might be something completely different. So I would definitely, that's a place where you do have contact with the staff. And I would encourage parents to be in touch with the staff before they make any decisions. Sometimes pulling a kid out of a situation like this can be very abrupt and very difficult and very discombobulating. That's the only word that I can think of at this late hour of the night. It can be and much better to make these decisions jointly together, taking into account what the child is thinking, the grown-up child, your adult child, and not making decisions for them. Yeah.
And their volunteering in a hospital over the next week or two may be the most meaningful memory they will have positive out of this entire experience.
Absolutely.
Dr. Baum, thank you so much. We wish that you, your family, everyone should continue to be safe.
Thank you.
Dr. Norman Blumenthal is the OL Zacta Family Director of the Zacta Family National Trauma Center. This webinar is being sponsored by the Zacta Family National Trauma Center. Dr. Blumenthal is a director at OHEL. He's also a professor at Yeshiva University of the Pastoral Counseling Program. Dr. Blumenthal also has a private practice in Cedarhurst, New York. Dr. Blumenthal, thank you for joining us and sharing with us your thoughts about how parents can relate and speak to children at different ages during this very difficult time.
Thank you very much, David. And as I often begin, I like to quote the rabbi of the synagogue that I grew up in, who used to begin his sermon with, "Before I speak, I want to say something." So before I speak, I also want to say something. First, I want to thank OHEL, you, David, and our board, Kesper and Mel Zachter, making it possible for us to do this very important work. And really, it's very easy to look good when you have the wonderful colleagues that I do that work with me, with Zivi Reidish, Oliver Chanovsky, Carly Namder, and Bracha Rupp down representing our Florida team, as well as Laura Bart, who really does a lot of the important work. And of course, at my age, we're particularly appreciative of Zamir and the IT team, make sure everything works right. I also want to acknowledge what a wonderful presentation. Naomi, that she reminds me of the story of a very senior rabbi who went to a small community out of town where there was a rookie rabbi. And this senior rabbi gave a masterful speech. And afterwards, the young rabbi came to him and said, "Rabbi, that was a beautiful speech. I wish I had given it." And he said, "You will." And I think I'm going to be repeating a lot of what Naomi said. Naomi and I go back a very long time. And my bracha to you and Mike, is that given the lifelong dedication that both of you in varying ways have given to the Jewish community, and the zchut of that, everyone in your family should return home unharmed and able to resume their normal lives with their beautiful families. I think I'd like to start by sharing a little bit of what I went through this past weekend. Not obviously everything. We all have our stories of how this day, that is the days that are supposed to be the consummate joy, were so shattered. We were visiting our kids in Montreal, and sure enough, come to shul. At first heard bits and pieces, really didn't even know the full scope of the tragedy. But by Saturday night, it was quite evident. And the rabbi of the community, this was the TBDJ community in Montreal by Clemmer, guided the community, as so many rabbis have. And he said, "Look, we'll do one quick hakafa. We're going to contain our joy, given the enormous grief and suffering in Israel. But for the kids, we'll try to promote it, make it as joyous as possible, give them a lot of candy, dance with them, so they have joyous memories of Simchat Torah," which made a lot of sense to me. And I remember standing there in shul, watching the kids having such a blast, and I was jealous of them. they're so oblivious to this, and they don't walking around with this heavy heart, and how much I wished I were one of them at that moment. Motzei Shabbos, I had a very interesting dream. I was wondering how would I be able to sleep, and I don't mind sharing the dream. Doesn't, I think, divulge all that much, but I'll tell you my interpretation. I had a dream that I was supposed to do a presentation at a conference, and I was going to present the case, one of my patients, and that this patient was with me in my car driving to the conference because he was going to be there as my model for the work that I do. No, I would never do that. But in dreams, all sorts of unrealistic things can happen. And then in the middle, he decided he didn't want to anymore. So he somehow got out of the car, and I had to drive back home. And I said, all right, I'll just present it from my notes. Not that I have paper notes anymore, but sure enough, I couldn't find the right notes, and my papers are all over the place. And then I woke up with that kind of anxiety you have when you have an anxiety dream. And of course, thought about it and realized that I think what the dream was expressing was my helplessness. How this terrible thing is happening to people I love, to people I care about, to my fellow Jews. And I was helpless. There was nothing I could do. Motzei Yom Tov, as I come home, walking home to the kid's house, I was dreading opening up my phone and hearing details, and really very down and very distressed. And of course, no sooner had Yom Tov ended when there were all the phone calls and the requests, and we have to put together recommendations, and I was suddenly given assignments and given something to do. And it was incredibly therapeutic. It really helped me that now I was doing something. Now that was not obviously anywhere near what Naomi's children are doing, a grandchild, and those in Israel, but at least from where I was, I had a tough kid. I had something to do, and I think it really speaks to what Naomi mentioned as well. Do something, and do something doesn't mean necessarily, we can't all, run to hospitals and volunteer or make food for the soldiers, but doing something can be saying Tehillim. Doing something can be deciding in some way or another, we will change ourselves. And we will make ourselves different, as in honor, in the zchut, for the safe return of all our soldiers. And so sometimes here in America, we don't know, what are we going to do? We're going to smuggle arms like they did in 1948. Israel, they don't need that. That's at different times. But we can do something that is in honor of our brothers and sisters. And that's also not only the right thing to do from a spiritual perspective, but it's also good, helpful psychologically, and helps us reach that level of regulation that Naomi mentioned. I also want to, I'm not correcting, but I want to just finesse, or actually maybe append something to what Naomi mentioned, which is that, she talked about being regulated, and it's so important. I often think back to Harry Stack Sullivan, who was the founder of the American School of Psychiatry, and he used to tell the residents that when you're doing therapy, there should be only one anxious person in the room, preferably not the therapist. Anxiety can be very contagious. There are reasons for that. And in olden times when there was great danger, or even now, today in Israel, there's great danger, the ability to transmit anxiety, the ability to convey anxiety to somebody else was essential to survival. Because if you're being attacked, as we have been yesterday, to alarm people ensures our safety and survival. So if you are overly overwrought, then your child will be overwrought, and it doesn't really matter what you say. In fact, one of the points I always make to parents and teachers, that in situations like this, your voice tone and your body language is often more important than what you say. I know when I have to go into a school or a work setting or a shul after a tragedy, while I'm driving there, I'm a mess. When I leave, I'm near hospitalization. When I'm in there, I act very certain of myself, sometimes even more certain than I feel, because it is comforting to the audience if I, as supposedly the expert, am in control. But I want to make a point that being regulated doesn't mean that you're not sad. And being regulated doesn't mean, as Naomi actually did mention, doesn't mean you're not scared. We're human, and I think that's good to model as well. I often think back to, I think it's about 5-6 years ago now, the Sassoon fires. I'm sure you all remember, terrible tragedy here in Brooklyn, where 6 out of 7 children perished. And one of the most common questions we got asked as the OHEL trauma team, after this tragedy was, can I cry in front of my children? Can I cry in front of my talmidim, my students? And the answer we gave them, and I think that's what we're talking about now, is yes, tears can roll down your cheek as you're talking about something like that. How could you not? It's a wonderful lesson for people to learn that emotions are normal. But you can't shriek and scream and tear your hair out. That's scary. And here too, being regulated means that you can admit to being sad, you can cry, as I did when I davened Mariv Motzei Yom Tov. You can express your terror and your fear, but it doesn't. But you can be in control of it, and you can be comfortable with it. You can integrate it. You can make it part of yourself and convey that to a child, and that's extremely important as well. So there was reference to social media and internet, and I want to just again go into that a little more, and then and David gave me a forewarning. He's going to ask me that question, so I have a head start. But yes, it's very important to contain it, especially today. There was a time, and I know that some of us, David, Naomi, and I can remember, where news was relegated to 3 newspapers and maybe 5 television channels. Today, there's a plethora of news sources competing with each other for your attention. And the more sensational the reporting is, and sometimes even the more gruesome it is, the more they hope to grab your attention. It's important for yourself to first of all know the sources of information, to take it in bite-sized portions, model that for your children. Your children are living with this, and your children are growing up with it. Also, and this is a theme we emphasize very much on the trauma team, today we live in the age of information. We live in the age of technology. We no longer live in the time where adults are the gatekeepers of information. A child can click a mouse and find out anything. And again, we have to teach our children. We don't have to try to avoid it. We can't. It's part of life, unless you live in a very insulated community. But we can teach them how to responsibly use it. But the other thing is that today we err in the direction of over-informing than under-informing. We're no longer insulating children from scary information as much as we used to. And what's happened is we've lost that bubble of naivete, that bubble of safety that used to be part of childhood. Maybe I saw a little bit of it in Montreal, which I was jealous of, but we don't have it as much. Children feel entitled to know, certainly elementary school age children, older do, and they want to know. And if we don't tell them, then they're going to hear from other people. And if they hear from other people something, information we withheld from them, they're going to start wondering, what else are we not telling them? They're not going to jump to the conclusion, as I might have as a child, that my parents are just protecting me. So again, we may have to be more informative than, if we're not sure, we're going to err in the direction of giving too much information, but again, with that right voice tone, and also with the perspective of how immediate that danger is. In addition, by the way, to doing something, I can emphasize how important it is to talk. And again, Naomi alluded to as well, speak it out and model that for our children as well. If you're upset or you're distressed, there's studies, again, I'm a little late in time, so I'm going to rush through it, but there are many studies that show that even anatomically, when you recall a trauma, it impacts on the very primitive part of your brain, that down in the brainstem, the part of the brain that we share with the animal kingdom, that all that emotion, fear, impulse. When we talk about it, it literally anatomically transfers from that primitive part of our brain to that more advanced part of our brain, the frontal cortex, the Broca center, which is logic and language. And that gives us much more mastery, or what we used to call in Latin, bias. At least my mother told me it was Latin, over it. So again, just packaging it in words. And if you are the audience and your child or your spouse or your parent are talking to you about their terror and their fear, you don't have to give them advice. Be an active audience. Be a listening audience. Listen as we can see that David had to Naomi, how much he absorbed from it. Be that person and clarify maybe something that wasn't clear, but allow it to be expressed in words, and that is incredibly therapeutic. One more point in terms, and then I'm going to get a little bit developmentally, the question about should people ask their children to come home? Should they encourage them to stay? And my answer is very much in the same direction, not surprisingly as Naomi's was. But while I was driving down from Montreal, I asked my mentor, my wife, whose wisdom never ceases to amaze me, and I asked her just, if you had a child in Israel, we don't right now. We have a child who lives there. And of course, she's not coming back. But if we had a child in yeshiva or seminary, not even to get into the lone soldiers, but if you have a child in yeshiva or seminary, would you encourage them to come home or not? And I think her answer was very nuanced and appropriate. Depends on the child. You know, if it's a child very prone to anxiety or fear, if it's a child who maybe has very little self-control and may do risky things, yes, I would encourage them to come home. If it's a child who is very idealistic, if it's a child who is more, let's say, resilient by nature or less impacted. If it's a child maybe who is in seminary, yeshiva, or university and really taking advantage of it and really using it in a very constructive way. As a child who all their lives dreamed of being in Israel and think along the lines of Aliyah, I might have a very different approach. So I think that's my advice to the parents as well. There's not a cookie cutter response here. Know your child and make the proper recommendation or advice based on your understanding of the child. Let me quickly go through different developmental stages of children and impact. I know there's much I want to say that I probably won't have time to say, but I'll try to get it in. Let's talk quickly about preschool-age children. Preschool-age children will not fully understand what's happening. They certainly may not be accessing it on the internet and may not be reading about it, but they'll have a diffuse sense of something untoward happening. And I've heard already from a number of parents of even like 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds who were fine, who suddenly can't sleep and are running to bed. And not that they understand, but they have a sort of general sense of something dangerous happening. If they are aware, first of all, keep in mind that at their tender age, there are two concepts that they will not fully understand. They don't understand geography. You might have a globe in your house, although now everything's on the internet, but they're not going to know how far those horrific events are from where you are now. And sometimes you might have to tell them those are very far away. Another concept that they're not familiar with is the concept of rare. It doesn't, to say to them that's highly unlikely that something like this would happen to us. Rare requires an awareness how big the world is and how long it's been around. And for them, the world is about 2 blocks long and has only been around for about, a few months. So we don't usually suggest saying rare. We say, no, we will not. We say definitively, it will not happen to us. Do we know for sure? No, but the statistics isn't important here. We want them to feel secure. We want them to feel safe. Also, these children this age thrive on routine. So if you are distressed, again, please try to maintain their routine, bedtime, baths, lunch, breakfast, whatever it may be. Preserve the routine. If you're worried about your child under the age of 6, a very good way to sort of figure out if they're troubled is, and this, you might find this surprising, but with half an ear, listen to their play. Usually when our kids are playing, we're happy to have that break and we do all the things we've ignored while we were busy with them. But children, through their imaginary play, try to figure out the world. And if the child's play is distressed, if the child's play involves very bad people breaking into homes and harming people, this is on their mind. And sometimes, by the way, the most effective way is to get on your hands and knees and in the context of the play, try to answer their worries instead of using words. So those are just, again, very quickly pointers. And again, I will take questions and we're certainly available after the webinar if people have questions, and we'll do our best to answer them. Elementary school age children, again, some just very important point. First of all, they do understand the breadth of time in the world. So rare is important, means something to them. The fact that something is close or far away takes on, is meaningful to them. Elementary school age children, particularly boys, are very interested in facts. There's a developmental reason for that. I don't want to spend time. If there's an interest, I'll talk about it. But you'll find very often that when you're discussing something this scary and upsetting, and you'd like them to, at least you want to see within them some emotional response, the response instead will be, well, how many of them were there? And what kind of guns did they use? And how did they get in there? And did anybody fight back? And you'll say, well, why is that important? That's how kids that age think. They're comforted by facts. So it's not a sign of any kind of callousness. It's very normal for that age, and answer the facts as best you can. And also, if you don't know, say you don't know. Now, there is a difference between that kind of inquiry and what we would call maybe the more obsessive, repetitive, anxiety-based asking, where they're asking questions are no longer for information, but are just a reflection of their anxiety. If you see that, of course, you stop it and you contain it and you assure them of their safety. But if it's the normal kind of curiosity, they just want to wrap their hands around it by knowing about it, it's good to answer the question. And by the way, also that will help them limit their trying to find information through social media and internet, because they'll rely on you as a source of information, and you are the best person to impart that information to them. The elementary school age children also tend to see the world very often in polarized ways, good guys, bad guys. And of course, something like this can really tap into that, especially because in the early part of this terrible tragedy, the bad guys were winning, to put it in the children's way, that the people who are our enemies in many respects appear to have tried, and have in some ways, rendered us terrible harm and hurt and pain. And that's hard for all of us, but particularly a child who believes that at the end of which it is true of their world and their stories, and even biblical stories, that ultimately the good guy wins. This can be very distressing for children who see the world very much in that polarized way. And again, the answer to that really would be, to some extent, is to remind them of the strength and the remarkable skills of the Israelis and the Israeli army. Let's not get into the idea of maybe there was an intelligence failure here, but the strength of the army and what Israel has been able to do to make them feel secure and safe. Another approach, and this, by the way, would span both, I think, adolescents and children, based a lot of the research being done out of Emory University on the importance of ancestry and stories of ancestry. And I think if you can try to place, these events in the broader context of our history of anti-Semitism, prejudice, dating back to the Bible, and how we have triumphed in terms of our survival. And when you put it in that broader perspective, and by the way, also may be very relevant to those of us who are ancestors of survivors, as many as I know we are, three of us here are, maybe more I'm not aware of, four, put it in that context of the resilience and the coping in times of terrible persecution and genocide, attempted genocide, may at least take it out of the context of it as being just an overwhelming tidal wave of events, maybe potentially destroying us, that this fits in this broader context, and that may be helpful. Maybe the older elementary school age children or the adolescents. Quickly to adolescents, because I see it's almost 5 o'clock. By the way, I'm going to say this, I should mention, obviously, what many of us always struggle with when there's tragedy, when we hear about young people. My son-in-law sent me a picture of a friend of his who died in Kibbutz Be'eri, looking like the sweetest person imaginable. When you see that, you struggle with the why bad things happen to good people, what's called in philosophy theodicy. How can a kind God allow this to happen? And of course, that's the unanswerable question. Elementary school age children are not busy with that. So sometimes we're struggling with it and we start trying to explain it to children. They're not busy with that, but adolescents are. Just given their cognitive development and their level of individuation at that age. So they may bring that up and they may struggle with that. And again, I want to assure you that doesn't mean they're rebelling, and that doesn't mean they're going off the derech. That's very typical for children that age. But the benefit is with adolescence is the idea that there can be a question that's unanswerable, or the idea that God, by definition, has to be mysterious. Or to quote the famous quote from the Kotzker Rebbe, "I can never believe in a God I could understand." It's something they can tolerate. So you're not going to get, with the younger children, you can talk about Gan Eden, you can talk about Chias Mason, you can talk about how people who die al Kiddush Hashem really go straight to heaven in a very special way. Those things are relevant to them. To the adolescent, you can listen, acknowledge, say it's a struggle for you too. It's a struggle for everyone. And it's not, we can't understand, we will understand until that long awaited day when Mashiach comes, or in our respective 120th birthdays. But that'll be typical for adolescents. Adolescents are also capable of empathy, more than just sympathy. And again, I'm not going to bring the studies because it's already 5 o'clock, but adolescents have cognitively the capacity to sort of leave themselves and put themselves in somebody else's place. So the adolescent, especially the young adolescent, where this is a new skill, and when we have new skills, we play them, rather than some of us now who are losing skills. But when you have a new skill, it's exciting. So I find this particularly with middle school aged girls. They'll very much imagine themselves, lo aleinu, being taken hostage, being attacked at a concert, having our homes invaded, worrying about people who are missing, worrying about children who are on the front in very dangerous situations. And they, by putting themselves in that situation, they can get overwrought. And again, sometimes we need to help people evoke the right emotions. Sometimes we have to teach them, as Naomi mentioned, how to contain them. Again, I'm going to conclude very quickly now with just one more, I hope, more hopeful message, which is sometimes people ask me how I can do this kind of work. How can I have spent a career dealing largely with tragedy and mishaps on a global level? And this is a shared one that we're all sharing in, and some which are more individual. And one of the answers I give them is I don't just see horror and death and injury. I see tremendous coping. I see a huge amount of unity, and I see a whole lot of love. And that goes for us as adults, and that goes for our children. In fact, sometimes we could learn from our children. Children are remarkable in their capacity to make sure that they're taken care of, and they get the help they need. So I want to just to comfort myself and to comfort all of the 500 people who have registered or joined us, to know that, you know, they say, and we say that God brings the refuah before the makkah, that he gives us the cure before the tragedy. We have within us, and as a community, we have within us a remarkable capacity to cope. And while we're suffering terribly and legitimately so, I think we can take some degree of solace over the courage, and certainly the courage of our soldiers, but also of the unity, the care and concern that we're seeing. I hope this has been helpful. And again, we are, as trauma team, or should I speak for Naomi as well, are available for any further questions or issues.
Dr. Blumenthal, this conversation has been so important, Dr. Blumenthal and Dr. Baum. I just want to keep this conversation going for a very brief few minutes. Dr. Blumenthal, you emphasize that when parents speak to their children, they should have the proper voice tone and the proper body language. A parent can convey their fear to their child. They should think about doing it in an appropriate way. Kind of words that they use, the right setting. They should be prepared, as Dr. Baum said, for the conversation with their child. We've had many questions that people have asked us about how much detail should you give to your child, to your curious child, about death, about kidnapping, about all the things that are going on. And your answer, of course, that you said several times, it's age appropriate to a young child, to a middle school child, to an adolescent, and so on and so forth. Each person knows their child best. I'd like to suggest the following thought. There are so many negative images that are being discussed. This is a war. Prime Minister Netanyahu said, this is not a conflict, we are at war. The Knesset of Israel declared a state of war for the first time in 50 years. The word war has certain connotations. Parents can also take the opportunity to discuss the heroism in the war, not only the negative images. Talk about the role that soldiers have in protecting people. The soldiers, the border patrol, the police officers. Talk about the heroism that soldiers have, that story that has been on the internet, the great story of a soldier whose son was born 8 days ago. And he took the time to be present, even by Zoom, at the Brit Milah. What about women that are giving birth yesterday, today, and tomorrow, and their husbands are on the front lines, or wives and mothers that are serving in the army? Those are heroic stories you can talk about. A question was asked, you referenced it towards the end. How do you tell your child, how do you reassure your child at 9/11, the Twin Towers fell? And so there were stories that the Twin Towers fell. The Twin Towers fell. And so twins would ask their parents, Mommy, Daddy, I'm a twin. Am I going to die? Am I going to fall? That's the image that they hear. So many kidnappings of children reassure what you said earlier. You can't guarantee anything in life, but you can reassure your child that you're going to be safe, that you're not going to be kidnapped, that it is okay. We live in a world in which there's a lot of hate. Kids are going back to school tomorrow. In the United States, today was a day off after the Sukkot holiday. Talk to your children about what they're going to be hearing in school, how to answer questions. If they have questions, to come home and ask your parents, ask your mommy and daddy, your Abba and Ima, and then we will talk about it. I want to take this special moment to thank Dr. Naomi Baum, speaking to us from Israel, Dr. Norman Blumenthal, speaking to us from Ohel. This entire conversation has been taped and will be shared with individuals. We ask all the participants to take an extra moment. We will follow up asking you to take literally 1 minute to complete an evaluation, a questionnaire, so we know how to continue this important conversation. We will undoubtedly have additional webinars, according to Dr. Baum, on stress and extreme stress, according to Dr. Blumenthal, on trauma and crisis response, and of course, you're both right depending on the circumstance. Everyone should be safe. I thank my colleagues who Norman referenced earlier, Tzivi Ryder, Cheryl Chernovsky, Dr. Colleen Amder, Laura Bart. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Everyone be safe. We'll speak again soon. Have a wonderful day.
Be well. Okay.